Welcome to Breastfeeding with Confidence. I'm Jamie Zaki, and I'm going to share with you my 5 tips for reaching your breastfeeding goals. A little about myself. I'm a certified birth doula and postpartum doula. I'm an international board certified lactation consultant, a former La Leche League leader, a birth photographer, and military wife. I want to share with you some words that my clients have shared with me about their experiences working with me. The reason I want to share this with you is because I think it's really important to understand just how impactful support can be during this really challenging time of your life. Even though it's a really beautiful and special time, we all have to admit it's hard. And having quality support just can make all the difference. In 2019, Joanne said, "You certainly went above and beyond our expectations during the hardest moments in my life." And I thought that just in itself made so much of an impact on, or so much of a statement, really, on what mothers go through. These are the hardest moments of your life. They're the most beautiful, but for so many of us, they're the hardest. And even though you have people around you who should be able to support you, it can be really important to just have somebody else who is 100% committed to serving you. One client's husband actually said, and this quote makes me laugh every time, "Your expertise brought calm when we were about to lose our shit." And I just think that's so relatable. Let's be honest, as parents, I think there are so many times we are about to just lose our minds. And we're really just, it's hard to hold it together sometimes, especially when you're nervous. So it's really important to have somebody who can kind of guide you to find the answers and help you find your confidence and find that strength. And it really does make a huge difference having that kind of support. So today's objectives, we're going to talk about identifying your breastfeeding goals, 5 tips to reach your goals, and frequently asked breastfeeding questions. So, how long should I breastfeed tends to be the $1,000,000 question for new parents. The Academy of Pediatrics, Centers for Disease Control, and World Health Organization all have guidelines with their suggestions on how long is an optimal time to breastfeed your baby. They all agree that babies should be breastfed exclusively for the first 6 months of life. And after that, we should introduce solid foods. And breastfeeding should still be the primary source of nutrition until 1 year of life. The Academy of Pediatrics says longer as mutually desired. Centers for Disease Control says children should be breastfed for at least 1 year. And the World Health Organization actually ups the ante and suggests 2 years minimum of breastfeeding or longer. So there's really no upper limit to how long you can breastfeed your baby. The minimum we really want to shoot for is 6 months exclusive breast milk, because that just really sets babies up for optimal health and functioning. Now, we recognize that that's not always possible. Sometimes there needs to be breast milk or supplementation with artificial milk, and that's okay too. So, your breastfeeding goals. How do you set your breastfeeding goals? You know those guidelines, but if they don't fit your lifestyle, that's okay. You might have a different idea. Some people will have a goal of 6 months and then decide once they hit 6 months, okay, let's change that to a year. I like to suggest 3 steps of goals. Make your ultimate goal, your big goal. If you knew breastfeeding would be the easiest thing you've ever done in your life, how long would you want to do it for? Now, short-term goal. If you knew breastfeeding was going to be the hardest thing you did in your life, what is the minimum amount of time that you would want to say you breastfed for? And then your middle term goal, I kind of just use as a stepping stone goal. So what I often suggest to people is to say, if your ultimate goal is 1 year, per the recommendations we looked at before, then you can have a short-term goal of 6 weeks. And then, if I can make it through the first 6 weeks, then maybe I can make it to a midterm goal of 6 months. And if I can make it to 6 months, then I just might hit that goal of 1 year. That makes 1 year not seem as long and scary. When your baby turns 1 year old, you're going to look back and be like, wow, time flew. But when your baby's born, looking forward to the 1 year mark seems like a really long time, especially if breastfeeding is hard. And I don't want you to feel overwhelmed and burdened by that goal. So, setting short term goals is a great way to have little milestones to celebrate and to look forward to. So, now you know what your breastfeeding goals are. How are you going to reach your breastfeeding goals? What can you do? My 5 breastfeeding tips are as follows. Learn about breastfeeding before your baby arrives. Consider giving birth in a location with breastfeeding supportive providers. Make the most of golden hour and skin to skin. Build a support network. And take one day at a time. So let's talk about step number 1. Learn about breastfeeding during pregnancy. Ideally, we should all learn about breastfeeding before we're even pregnant. In cultures before ours, when breastfeeding was the only option, women learned about breastfeeding while growing up. They saw their family members breastfeeding, other women in the village were breastfeeding, and supporting each other with breastfeeding. They were navigating these challenges together. It wasn't hidden, it was a part of their life, it was ingrained in their culture. But that's not so true today. So now we have to kind of prepare ourselves, usually once we find out we're pregnant. I know for myself, I learned a little bit about breastfeeding in nursing school, but nothing that really prepared me to be a breastfeeding mother. Other than that, I had no exposure to it. So when I got pregnant, I realized that's what I wanted to do, and I had to educate myself. And I didn't even realize in the beginning of pregnancy that I needed to educate myself on that. I didn't realize that until my last trimester. So I had to cram a lot of information into a little time. I want you to start learning about breastfeeding as early as you can. Take a class. Read a book. I highly recommend The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding, published by the Leche League. This book is what I call the breastfeeding Bible. It is a book that can prepare you, give you resources when you're having a hard time, and is an amazing reference to look back at when you're struggling in the first couple weeks. Not only is it great for you, but it's a great way for your partner to get involved. Your partner can flip through the pages and find one of the troubleshooting pages, read a little bit, and learn about how to support you. Join a support group. La Leche League, Breastfeeding USA, and your local hospital all probably have classes or groups near you. If you can't attend one in person right now, especially because of this whole social distancing during the COVID pandemic, then go online. There are online support groups. I'm sure Breastfeeding USA has support groups online. La Leche League definitely has Facebook support groups. And I'm sure local hospitals do as well. In addition to that, there's just a ton of breastfeeding support groups out there. You have to take some of the information with a grain of salt, but it's still support, and they're still so informative. Talk to your friends and your family. If you know people who have experience with breastfeeding and reached their goals, ask them how they did it. Ask them what they struggled with and how they overcame those struggles to reach their goals. And talk to your healthcare provider. Having an OB or midwife who is supportive of breastfeeding can really help you prepare for breastfeeding, especially if they have resources for local IBCLCs, classes, and support groups. Number 2, choose a provider and birth location wisely. Like I said before, your provider can be a really good resource for you. Some providers are very informed on breastfeeding, and I consider them breastfeeding savvy providers. They are up to date with the most recent recommendations and have a list of IBCLCs to refer to when they're in over their head. They don't hesitate to refer out. On the other hand, you have some providers who are not super up to date with the latest breastfeeding information and don't really refer out. They just say, oh, this is my assessment. This is what you should do. and be done with it. If they don't have a network of lactation consultants to refer you to, I wouldn't consider them breastfeeding savvy, and I don't think they're going to be helpful for your reaching your goals. When you interview pediatricians, you can ask them questions like, what do you do if a baby starts losing weight? If I'm having trouble breastfeeding, do you have a list of providers to refer me to? If my baby has a tongue tie, how do you address that? All kinds of things to be talking to pediatricians about because, again, we want to make sure that they're breastfeeding supportive. A hospital that has baby-friendly status is a hospital that is dedicated to many different aspects of supporting the mother-baby dyad post-birth. One of those things is ensuring skin-to-skin contact. It's not interrupting the golden hour. It's not offering formula unnecessarily. It's not giving formula to take home. It's not giving pacifiers to take home. It's encouraging rooming in. And not all hospitals that do these practices have baby-friendly designations. So I'm not saying you should only birth at a baby-friendly designated center, but that designation can be a good sign that the staff is supportive. That's not always the case, and just because they have the certification doesn't mean they're good, and just because they don't have the certification doesn't mean they're bad. But it's just one of those things that can be a conversation point for you when you take your tour or talk to your doctor. You do want to see if they have an IBCLC on staff where you're giving birth. If the hospital doesn't have any IBCLCs on staff, then they don't have breastfeeding experts on staff. Staff nurses and floor nurses are usually trained in breastfeeding and have really good support, but there are things that are kind of beyond them and outside of their scope. And it's really beneficial to have a certified lactation consultant helping you in those early days. Number 3 is to make the most of the golden hour and spend lots of time skin to skin. It's so important that if you can remain skin to skin with your baby for the first hour of life, that you do. Biologically, this is the next step to being born. Babies were biologically designed to go from being inside of you to being born and laid on your abdomen and doing what's called the breast crawl. If a baby was laid on its mother's abdomen and left totally alone for the first hour after birth, the baby would naturally use its reflexes, the stepping reflex and the rooting reflex, to make its way to the breast and latch himself on. It's a pretty amazing phenomenon, but it just doesn't happen that often. If this can happen, that's awesome. Hospitals that support baby-friendly, that implement baby-friendly policies and give that skin-to-skin and for the first hour after birth have a more likelihood of this breast crawl happening. Skin to skin can trigger hormonal chain reactions that help with breast milk production and also help with bonding. This can also have a direct impact on postpartum mood disorders. Skin to skin also helps regulate your baby's body temperature, heart rate, and respiration rate, and help get your baby stable after birth. Skin to skin is also beneficial for the microbiome. You might have heard this word a lot, or you might not have, and that's okay. But when your baby passes through the birth canal, they get colonized with a lot of different microbiota. And this is really good because we want to have a healthy microbiome for your baby. And your baby's healthy microbiome is your microbiome. Even after your baby's born, the two of you are really still connected and supposed to be like one. So when the baby is on your skin, the baby can pick up the bacteria that's on your skin, and it can colonize the baby's gut and intestines, and this can all really just help build a more healthy and robust immune system. But this also helps with the way that your body supports your baby's immune system. Because when you guys share a microbiome, your body makes antibodies that pass through breast milk and are given to your baby to support his immune system. It's really amazing the way we were designed. Number 4 is to build your support network. Your support network ideally should have many different kinds of support. A doula is really good because they have some pretty good foundational knowledge of breastfeeding. And typically, if something gets beyond their scope or they think, hey, you might need a little help, a lot of times a doula will know a pretty good lactation consultant. Friends are so important. Having the support of your friends, especially if they're also in the same stage as you, can really help just push you through because you guys can go through the highs and lows together. We talked about the importance of having a supportive healthcare provider and the importance of having a good IBCLC. You can find a good IBCLC before your baby is born. Doing this can help set you up for knowing who to call if you have challenges. You don't want to be looking around on day 3 trying to figure out what the heck is an IBCLC and how do I find one. Look for one before you're pregnant. And you can also use your IBCLC to help prepare you for breastfeeding. If you have any medical concerns or want to take a specialized class on breastfeeding, you can do that with an IBCLC. They often offer prenatal support to help prepare you so that you can go in confident. Your family is going to be so supportive. But more important than your friends and your doula and your family and your doctor and your IBCLC, the person that makes and breaks breastfeeding relationships can be your partner. Now, I'm not saying you can't breastfeed and reach your goals if you have an unsupportive partner, but I'm saying it's going to be a lot easier with a supportive partner. Having a supportive partner can make all the difference. Having a supportive partner can look like your partner gets you water while you're nursing the baby and is understanding that your baby's going to nurse a lot. Maybe your partner takes the breastfeeding classes with you so they know what to expect and they're not getting shocked and frustrated at the way breastfeeding's going. And maybe if they take the class with you or thumb through that book that I recommended, they'll be able to help you troubleshoot some of the challenges you find yourself in. And they'll know who to call when you need help. And number 5 is really just take it one day at a time. Even though breastfeeding is natural, it doesn't always come naturally. We expect it to be something easy that we'll just figure out, and some of us do. Some of you will, but it's going to be hard for some of you, and that's normal. That's natural too. Especially when you weren't raised witnessing breastfeeding and experiencing it. But even if you were, it can still be hard. Breastfeeding can be hard. That doesn't mean it's not worth it. With your support system and taking it one day at a time, you can reach your goals. Don't worry about, can I get to a year when it's a bad day? Just focus on getting to tomorrow. And then you can say, well, I got through today. Let me try tomorrow. And then you can look back and reassess your day the next morning. Do you want to do this again? Keep going. You can do this. Now let's talk about some frequently asked questions. Do I need to eat special foods to help make milk? The short answer is no. We'll go over how milk is made and how we can increase our milk production in Breastfeeding 101. But what I want to touch on today is you don't need to eat anything special to help make milk. You don't need galactagogues like special teas or oatmeal. You don't need to drink Gatorade or do anything special to increase your milk supply. You need to eat well-balanced meals and whole foods and stay hydrated. You don't need to drink 25 gallons of water a day. Just drink to thirst or to quench your thirst. You don't need to overhydrate yourself, but dehydration could maybe have an impact on your milk supply. So don't let yourself get dehydrated. Just take care of yourself. And your body might need an extra 500 calories per day. That's kind of an average. For some people, it might be more like 400. Others, it might be 600. The point is, you want to have enough calories to support your body and your baby's body. because your body is making milk all the time. So enough calories to support that metabolic energy. Can I or should I breastfeed during illness? Generally speaking, yes. Now, there's going to be some nuances, certain things maybe you shouldn't breastfeed with. Maybe if you have a specific concern, you should reach out to a professional. But generally speaking, for the common cold, average flus, and stomach bugs, the answer is yes. Your antibodies are going to protect your baby. So whether you decide to pump and bottle feed or feed directly from the breast, continuing breastfeeding is so important when you are sick because it helps protect your baby. You might decide to take precautions like washing your hands extra, not coughing right on your baby, maybe wearing a mask, maybe only being with your baby for feeding times. It's kind of common sense things. But at the end of the day, there doesn't need to be an interruption to breastfeeding. Stay hydrated. It's hard to stay hydrated when you're sick, but you need to stay hydrated. Staying hydrated can help prevent an impact to your milk supply. And specifically about COVID-19, there has been a lot of speculation, a lot of questions about breastfeeding with COVID-19. So far, there is no evidence that COVID-19 is passed through breast milk, and there is a lot of beliefs out there that the antibodies do pass through breast milk, so your baby would be protected if you continued to nurse your baby. If you read the CDC and World Health Organization recommendations, they kind of leave it up to the parent whether or not you want to be exposed to your baby and feed directly from the breast, or if you want to pump and bottle feed, have another caregiver bottle feed. They do recommend staying close to your baby only for feeds and using precautions like a mask, hand washing gloves, and trying to keep space and separation between feeds if you can. Ultimately, that's going to be up to you. Should I avoid giving my baby a pacifier or a bottle? This really comes down to a personal assessment of your goals and your personal needs. You might need to discuss this with an IBCLC or another professional. But overall, as long as you're using a bottle or a pacifier as a tool and not to completely replace breastfeeding or to hide your baby's feeding cues, then it's not necessarily the end of the world. My concern with bottles and pacifiers is using them in a way that does not support your milk supply. And I really do recommend taking a longer class so we can get more in depth on how to support your milk supply, because I don't want to spend too much time on that right now. But if a pacifier is masking your baby's feeding cues, then it could be a problem. If it's not masking your baby's feeding cues and you're using it occasionally as a tool to be able to take care of your other children or go take a quick shower, it's probably not the end of the world. How early is too early? I typically recommend waiting until breastfeeding is well established and going well before you introduce bottles and pacifiers. Depending on your challenges, you might need to introduce them sooner to help get through and cope and maybe even feed your baby. But again, that needs to be discussed with a lactation professional. For the general, healthy, normal dyad, I would say once breastfeeding is well established, if you feel like you need to use a pacifier, go ahead. It's not the end of the world. It's a tool. If you don't want to use a pacifier, that's okay too. There's no right answer here. And when should I start pumping? This is a really common question. It really depends, again, on a personal assessment of your goals and needs. It depends on how breastfeeding is going for you. Obviously, there are people who have challenges and need to pump right away. Right now, I'm going to talk more to the normal, healthy, average dyad. Unless you are returning to work very soon, I typically don't recommend pumping for the first few weeks. The studies show we want to try to avoid pumping for the first 6 weeks or so because we want to let our milk supply regulate and really get a breastfeeding established. If you need to start pumping before then, there's ways to do it in a way that supports your milk supply. You don't want to pump too frequently because you could pump yourself into an oversupply, which could increase risks of mastitis and engorgement. So, building a pumping care plan with a lactation professional is your best bet. So, I hope you really got some good answers to some of your questions, and I want to know, are you ready to feel confident about breastfeeding? Are you ready to feel supported? And are you ready to harness your inner fierce mama bear? Then I have the perfect class for you. Breastfeeding 101 is going to answer all of your questions. And if it doesn't, you can email me. What questions will be answered? Why is breast considered best? How is milk even made? What role do hormones play? How do I know what my baby needs? They don't come with a manual after all. Latching and positioning can be really important. If you don't get that right, breastfeeding can be harder. So how do I latch and position? Is my baby eating enough? I think this question is the one that haunts parents the most. Even as an experienced breastfeeder and lactation professional, I still find myself asking this question sometimes. Luckily for you, I can give you the tools to be sure that you're feeding your baby just fine. And what are some common breastfeeding challenges that I should expect? How do I navigate them if I experience them? If you want to take Breastfeeding 101, I want you to go to littlebearlactation.com/birthwithconfidence. Look for Breastfeeding 101 in the video channel, purchase access to the class, sit back, learn, and enjoy. And if you have any questions, seriously email me. You can contact me on my website. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, and I really hope I was able to answer some of your questions.